We're pleased to welcome Kevin Barry in support of That Old Country Music in conversation tonight with Jonathan Dee. First, a quick overview of our webinars. If you're joining us late and didn't hear me as you entered the room, the chat is closed. The chat window is closed for public chatting, but you might want to keep that chat window open during the event, as I will be providing links to purchase That Old Country Music and other books from Literati Bookstore. And if you're joining us later on YouTube or watching us later on YouTube, as always, there are links to purchase books in the description right below me. And you can submit questions if you're watching live for the Q&A using the Q&A feature available to you at the bottom of your screen at any time. And I'll read a selection of those questions at the conclusion of the conversation. As a reminder, you can also shop for more books at literatibookstore.com 24/7 for curbside pickup at the store Monday through Saturday, noon to 6 p.m., or to have shipped to your home anywhere in the United States. Fortunately, if you're joining us internationally, we are unable to ship internationally, but we do appreciate your support. And in lieu of a book purchase, we also ask anyone who might like to consider a $5 donation to sustain our virtual programming. So whether you'd like to think of that as this week's or this month's or this year's subscription to our programming, you can make donations at literatibookstore.com/donation. Otherwise, we simply thank you for your attendance this evening or this morning or this afternoon, depending on where and when in the world you may be joining us from. So without further ado, this evening I'll introduce our author and our moderator. Kevin Barry is the author of the novels Night Boat to Tangier, Beetlebone, and City of Bohane, and the story collections Dark Lies the Island and There Are Little Kingdoms. His awards include the IMPIC Dublin Literary Award, the Goldsmiths Prize, the Sunday Times EFG Short Story Prize, and the Landon Foundation Literary Award. His stories and essays, appeared in the New Yorker, Granta, and elsewhere. He also works as a playwright, screenwriter, and he lives in County Sligo, Ireland. And Jonathan Dee is the author of 7 novels, including The Locals, A Thousand Pardons, and The Privileges, which was a runner-up for the 2010 Pulitzer Prize, and winner of the 2011 Prix Fitzgerald and the St. Francis College Literary Prize. He's a National Magazine Award-nominated literary critic for Harper's and the New Yorker, former contributing writer for the New York Times Magazine, former senior editor of the Paris Review, and the recipient of fellowships for the National Endowment for the Arts and the Guggenheim Foundation. His most recent novel, The Locals, was longlisted for the inaugural Aspen Institute Literary Prize for a work of fiction with social impact. It was named the best book of 2017 by, among others, the Washington Post, Guardian, Vox, Kirkus, and the Seattle Times. He teaches in the creative writing program at Syracuse University. They can't hear you, but they can sense you through the power of the internet. So please join me in providing silently your raucous applause and welcoming Kevin Barry and Jonathan Dee into your living rooms.
Thank you so much to everyone at Literati for having us. And thanks so much for doing this, Jonathan.
Oh, it's my pleasure, Kevin.
Thanks a lot, man. I think our plan is that I'm going to start with a very short reading from this latest collection of stories. Because of the current plague, I don't have my lovely US copies yet. This is the lovely European edition. So it's a handsome book, actually, the US edition. I can't wait to get my mitts on one. Just to give a slight flavor, I'm going to read a couple of pages from the title story, That Old Country Music. Just to set it up very briefly, a young woman about 18 years old called Hannah Crean, is waiting in a van in the Curlew Mountains, which are about 5 miles as I point up that way. Her fiance, who was quite recently her mother's fiance, has gone to rob the local petrol station or gas station with a claw hammer, and she's waiting for him to return. Hannah Crean climbed from the van and walked from the forestry pines onto the back road. By now, the morning had clouded over, and the vast spread of the whitethorn blossom across the hillsides and the high fields and the ditches made an ominous aura as it moved in the wind. Once, as a child, she had been slapped across the face by her mother for bringing an armful of the blossom into the house. The whitethorn flowers, so much as passing the threshold, was a harbinger of certain death in the family by about the Tuesday of the next week. She had meant it as a gift for her lovely young mother. As she sat, On a 5-bar gate in the Curlew Mountains, the great meanness of the morning descended on her. She hummed a string of 4 or 5 notes against the meanness, not knowing where they came from nor how. The plan was that they would drive through the day in the north to the ferry at Larne for Stranraer, and from there descend through Scotland and the borders. She had watched his lips move as he recited solemnly the steps of it, through Cumbria to Yorkshire and to his cousins in the city of Wakefield. Over the nights, as they conspired, the word Wakefield had taken on the burnish of legend. She saw the city lights spread out. She imagined her child with a North of England accent, a neat little flat in a tower block. She saw herself and Setanta in the bed eating toast and taking photos of each other, his muscles flexed, her eyelashes fitted, and the toddler gurgling along in pure happiness on the rug on the floor. Setanta Brummel might soften his cough in Wakefield, she believed, and think harder about his decisions and forget all the nonsense with the lizards and the claw hammers. The day was up and about itself. The fields trembled. Catastrophe was a low-slung animal creeping darkly over the ditches across the hills. Her mother had found her one careless morning under the throw on the sofa, topless and asleep in the hot, emotional clutches of Setanta Brummel. That had made it a morning for the annals. Since then, they had slept in 2 sleeping bags zipped together at his King Ink studio. The studio was located over a butcher's shop in the town of Boyle. It reeked of their wild love and animal death. Setanta was 18 months behind on the rent and had a notice to quit, and lately this involuntary blinking in the left eye. But desperate times, he said, very often turned out to be disguised opportunities. Wakefield, as a shimmering prospect, was held aloft before her like a priest's chalice. By now, she knew that he would not come back from Castle Baldwin. On the 5-bar gate of a tiny farm high in the Curlew Mountains, she again closed her eyes to see pink fields. She went into a dream. If the moment was never ending, it might not even exist. She felt the presence of something very old and uncaring on the air. An insect's steady keening from the ditch was incessant, like a hopeless prayer or the workings of his needle. He had tattooed on her inner thigh a swallow in flight. In the black times, make you think of summer, he said. In the black times, she thought, it would take more than a badly drawn swallow aiming for my fucking gash. I'll pause it there. Thank you so much.
Thank you. That's great. And I had a feeling you were going to end on that line.
Where else?
Well, thanks so much, Kevin, for talking to me, for the benefit of everybody out there watching.
It's a treat.
That's one of my favorite stories in the book, actually. And I think one of the reasons it is that it just it is so tense and moving and emotional. And then when you think back on it afterwards, at least, as a writer, you think like, wow, that's a story in which really nothing happens.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
It's an amazing
It's nice that you say it's a favorite, because it's I think one of the most recent ones are, and as writers we always think that we're just getting slightly better with every story that we write, just by this tiny amount. But it's funny. It's my 3rd collection of stories. So the last one came out over on this side, Dark Lies the Island, in 2012. I think a year later in the US. So it's 8 or 9 years worth of stories, which is kind of it's a good chunk of time, and it's kind of long enough to see yourself changing, as a writer. So the earliest story in the book, I think, is Ox Mountain Death Song, which is kind of one of my kind of neo-Western kind of outlaw and sheriff stories set in the west of Ireland. And it was interesting that the stories have definitely got a little bit quieter, I think, in some ways, and a little more possibly a little kinder towards the characters, as is natural, I guess, as you get older yourself as a writer.
That you get quieter and kinder. I hope that's true. I'm not sure that's
Maybe not in every
I
case.
don't know if I'm living that out. But so I was going to ask, yeah, what are the changes that you notice in looking back over your own work and in putting together a collection like this? But you think it's, for instance, when you say kinder, the first thing I thought of is the first story in the book. I'm going to mispronounce, of course, many Irish names in the course of speaking, but the coast of Leitrim.
Yeah, not far out the coast of Leitrim. Yeah, and it's interesting as that's quite recent as well. I think I wrote it in 2018. And as I was writing that story, which is it's a love story. And like I've been writing short stories in a pretty serious, dedicated way for kind of a little over 20 years, I guess now, since my late 20s. And I think this is my first happy ending. This story, and it was as much as a surprise to me as it was to anyone. It's kind of there's a suggestion that this love story might work out, which isn't too much of a spoiler. The stories aren't plot heavy, so I don't mind giving away endings. But as I was writing that, I could sense actually that change in myself as a writer. It had a kind of an ominous feeling as it went along. He's the protagonist, Seamus, is kind of this kind of sniffy, fastidious 30-something man living quite near again to my current position, and he meets a young Polish lady. And I could sense all the while as I was writing the story that oh fuck, this is going to end with blood on the walls. It's only going in one direction, but then the kind of magical thing that can happen on rare occasions with a story is that it surprises you and it takes off in its own direction. It gathers its own volition, and that kind of ending that it has now presented itself very, very kind of, a word I hate, but organically, but naturally, it suggested itself.
Is that always the case for you? Do you feel like you when you in a story, you really have no idea where it's going to end up, or you have an idea that turns out to be wrong, or how does it?
It's they're unpredictable and they're mysterious short stories, and they're frustrating as a form. Because do you write stories, Jonathan, as well as novels? And
very few.
Yeah.
I wish I wrote more, but
yeah. It's weird. The longer you're at them, and the more you write them, it's almost more mysterious that they get, and you can't figure out why some work out and why most don't at all. I do remember from like before I started publishing fiction, I worked as a freelance journalist for years. I used to do a lot of literary stuff, and I remember I think the late 90s interviewing the great short Scottish story writer James Kelman.
Oh yeah.
He had a collection out. I think it was called Translated Accounts, about 99 or 2000. Very dense, weird collection, but brilliant. And I was talking to him about short stories, and as a kind of like an apprentice story writer myself, of course, I was really kind of looking for how do you do it? But he said something to me that turned out to be kind of horribly true, which is he said it's not easier that they get. Early on, I think in a story writer's career, there's to use that really horrible expression from the business world, there's a lot of low-hanging fruit. You're getting stories from everywhere. You can pluck them off the trees, and you're getting them out of your dreams and everything. It's like the band with their first album. They have this build-up of material, from everything from adolescence and the 20-something life, and then there after that there's certainly more hard won. I really like the form as a reader. I think it's an incredibly, in the hands of a good story, is an incredibly to be in that position. It's a really intense experience for the reader. It's like nothing else when the story is good. So I kind of worship the form, and I'm dedicated to continuing to try them. But I'd say if I probably try 5 or 6 a year, and one or two will ever make it outside the door. Really? I know that most are kind of crap even as I write them, but I'll kind of I do have a superstition about finishing all the bad ones, bringing them to some sort of conclusion, just to kind of earn the good ones from that horde of writer karma that's out there somewhere.
Yeah, no, I don't think it's a superstition. I think it's a discipline. I think and it makes it even more impressive how here in the States, I think there's at this point, a sort of default path for people who want to become writers of literary fiction, and it involves graduate school, right? But you took a different path. You did a little bit more old school, went out and lived a life, and I think you were 37 when your first book came out. Is that right?
I was, yeah. So not a spring chicken by any standard. Yeah, I had like what sounds now like something from like a Damon Runyon story or something. Like my first job was as a cub reporter on a local kind of city newspaper in Limerick, the city I grew up in, which turns out to be an absolutely fantastic job for a fiction writer in embryo. You know, just doing like court meetings and local council meetings and all that stuff gives you so much about the texture of small towns and cities and how they work, and gives you so much about the way language is used and manipulated in these places. And I always think that the best research you can do as a fiction writer, you don't realize it's research at the time. It's just the natural stuff you're soaking up in your life. And actually there's one story in this book, I mentioned it already, the Ox Mountain story, which is this kind of big fat old cop drifting around the mountains very nearby here again, looking for this young kind of outlaw figure. And it comes directly from something that a big fat old cop said to me in the courthouse in Limerick City in about 1989, when I was like a 20-year-old cub reporter. And it was really strange. I remember it very vividly. It was a small city, so you'd often know the people the defendants, you know. And there was a guy who had been in school with me, maybe a year behind or ahead, and he was up for something like relatively innocuous, stealing a car or something. And this cop, he was kind of a detective sergeant, a plainclothes guy, and he leaned over to me in the reporter's box and he said, "You see this kid? He'll kill." And I don't know if that prophecy turned out to be true, but it just had something about this aura of sort of old cop intuition about him, you know. And I stored it somewhere for years and kind of used it then for that story. But it's that my passage into writing fiction then was very kind of haphazard and tentative in my 20s, like when I was working as a freelance journalist mostly, between Ireland and the UK, back and forth a lot. I would kind of be writing stories at like 4 a.m, having crawled home from a nightclub on all fours, you know, writing these genius sentences with endless cantilevered clauses that would go on forever and ever and ever, and thinking it was at 4:30 a.m. it would look pretty great on the page, you know. But the sober light of morning would creep across Cork Harbour, and you'd see it going, "No, this takes a while yet." So I had to, I kind of got serious about it in my late 20s. I kind of declared to myself that I was going to take this seriously and work hard at it. But it still took a few years to kind of write out influences and stuff. I was reading very, very dangerously narrowly, I would say, in my 20s. I would get obsessed with particular writers and of course try to ape them on the page.
Sure. Now I have to ask who some
the great American Jews was my thing. Like Saul Bellow, especially Philip Roth, things like that. And of course it plants the idea in your mind that you're going to be the next great Jewish American writer yourself, you know. There was no way this was going to work out for me. So you just have to write all that influence out. And I
think you're right. I think it's something that you have to go through, no matter how embarrassing it is in retrospect. I lost a lot of years trying to write like James Salter after I discovered him.
He's one of those really, really, I love Salter as well. He's one of those really dangerous influences, because his style is so distinctive. I still sometimes copy his use of commas without getting too technical here. But it's he's just what was the other one I had, which was an especially awful influence to have on a young man's prose, was I had a James Elroy phase. Ooh. You know, I was reading like the Black Dahlia and the LA Confidential trilogy and all that, and of course started writing these kind of hard-boiled staccato sentences, you know. And it doesn't make any sense when you don't have the material for it, but you just have to write it all out. And like the ideal thing is to let, I think that when I started to find my own voice was when I realized that my influences didn't all have to be literary. My influences were also all the TV shows I'd watched and all the music I'd listened to and all the comic books I'd read, and I could let all this stuff mangle up together and maybe kind of cook up my own sort of mongrel style out of that.
Yeah. One of the things that I've read, you said about your way of working, and maybe this ties into the idea of identifying and cultivating your own voice instead of somebody else's, is that you read your work aloud to yourself. You say the ear knows, the eye is more easily fooled, which I find a really interesting idea. Is that
Yeah, I do. It's kind of the most critical stage of my process, really. I'm with stories and novels. I'm kind of generally about a 4 draft man. That the 4th draft tends to be kind of the final one. And what's important for me, the penultimate draft, the 3rd draft usually is I print it out and I act it out. I do it aloud. All the description, all the voices with red pen in hand. And it's just a very direct way of catching the evasions in the story, and finding out when the story is kind of skirting away from where it should be going. I think your eye will very happily glaze over bad stuff on screen or on the page. I think this is fine. It looks fine from here, But when you hear it aloud, there's kind of no disguising the bum notes, and especially if you've left it a while. All the things you hear about writing are nonsense, except the thing about putting it in the drawer for 6 weeks or 2 months. That's very important for me as well. Usually when you finish a story, there's a kind of a glow of completion where you think, if I finished it, it's marvelous, and that tends to go away quite quickly after you've put it away for a little while. But yeah, it's kind of I write a little bit for actors now as well in terms of writing plays and screenplays, and it's kind of it's natural for me to kind of hear the stories. I mean, Irish writing in general, it does have a very kind of oral quality. I think my stories kind of, in a way, find their full fruition in audiobook form. In some way, they're kind of at some level designed to be heard. I hope the reader of the book can hear them off the page. I think I think they're
I don't mean to interrupt you, but yeah, no. The sentences themselves are so. That's the way you experience it, even on the page, is orally. Do you read the books yourselves?
I do. I'm glad you asked me that, John. I do. Yeah. I love the fact that books have become a big thing. It's mysterious how quickly that's exploded. I kind of suspect that it's got to do with the podcast thing, that people have got used to listening to long form, and they've just taken that into the fictional realm as well, which is fantastic news for us all. But yeah, that one of the things that a lot of podcasts or a lot of audiobooks you listen to tend to be delivered by trained actors, in quite an actorly fashion, and that can be fine depending on the book. But I don't want to hear my stuff done in that style. So I'm kind of insistent on doing it. It's hard work recording audiobooks, but it's kind of I like to keep some kind of control over what it sounds like.
Sure, but that goes with the territory if you're writing screenplays or stage plays, and I always feel like one of the great consolations of being a fiction writer is it's great for control freaks. I mean, everything that happens in there happens because I wanted it to happen and for no other reason. So do you ever feel frustrated when people take off and start to acting out your own characters or reading your own words in ways that you didn't authorize?
I think some book writers find it hard to kind of transition to writing for stage or screen. They find it hard to give up control and kind of ownership. I don't mind it because I'm kind of I think weirdly it's because my background is kind of in freelance journalism, which is sociable, and I miss having colleagues. I live in rural Ireland. I live out in the sticks, and I don't teach or anything, so it's kind of it's me and the 4 walls out in the shed out the back that I work in. So I actually really relish when I have a play on or something I'm working on a short film. I've had one feature made, but I like having colleagues for a while and getting to go to rehearsals and talk to actors and doing table reads and all that sort of stuff. And you just have to be prepared to just give up ownership, and just realize that this is just a blueprint you're designing for your collaborators to take and bring in another direction. And it surprises you and sometimes horrifies you what to do with it, but it's you can get those magical moments as well where an actor will find something rich in the work that you quite weren't sure was there yourself.
Yeah, I can see. I mean, not in at least in moments in your work, they perform for the reader on the page very much like plays. I mean, large parts of Nightboat to Tangier seem
there's often, I have to confess, there's often an element of confusion when I start a story, what it is exactly, whether it's a play or a short story, or could this be a short film, or and my usual impulse actually is because I love stories, is can I make this work as a short story? And often very quickly it'll tell you no. Nightboat to Tangier, the most recent novel, started as an attempt at a play, but the story just kept going into the past. And I thought, okay, this has to be a novel. That's very difficult for a stage play to just go back and forth in time, to the extent. But that's the glorious thing about the novel. It can go anywhere. It can go in any direction, any tangent. As long as the sentences and the paragraphs are good enough, the reader will go with you. It's just such an unimprovable form in that respect. It's just like a hammer. It can do anything as long as you're paying attention to the kind of the tune of it, the melody of it, sort of page by page and paragraph by paragraph as you go along. The reader will go with you. So it's the short stories is more unforgiving. Really, you have so much less time and space to pin the reader to the page, to capture her or him, and bring them into this world. Inside half a page. That's why most stories go wrong, because it's difficult to do that. But there is a kind of you kind of know the ones that are going to go somewhere for you. There's a kind of it's like a tuning fork. You hear a kind of a resounding kind of ting when something is going right, and it's usually inside the first draft that you hear that, and you think, oh yeah, this might be some new way for me to approach this kind of material or whatever.
Yeah, I'm fascinated by the idea that you just have an idea, and it takes you to work out what kind of shape that idea can be hammered into. So what is it that you begin with when you begin? Is it a character or a scene?
It's generally often characters. Yeah, I mean, these two kind of fading gangster figures in the recent novel, Morris and Charlie. Actually, I think they would first show up in short stories whenever a short story was flagging. These two kind of very verbal gangster types would start talking and elbow their way into the story, and of course would have the immediate effect of destroying the misfortunate story because they were too large, and they kept showing up. And after a while I realized, oh fuck, I have to give these two their own thing. I have to tell their story and try get past the kind of a caricatural stage with them, try and make them three-dimensional. And then the stage play was another 3 weeks of my life, and then it's okay, they're a novel, but it's weird now they've gone full circle because I'm adapting the novel for screen at the minute. So they're still there and they're really annoying. They really drive me nuts because they won't shut up. And it's inspiration sounds like such a lovely fluffy thing, but more often than not, it's annoyance. It's these voices that are insistent and that keep going and that won't shut up. And it was I remember the day I sent the novel out to my two editors, one over on your side and one on this side, and it was such a relief to kind of go bye, get out of my house. Then of course I was immediately nostalgic for them and kind of missed them, but now they're back as I grapple with them again.
There are a couple of stories in the book that are toward the end that I think, I mean, as in any really good story collection, I think there are a couple of kind of pattern breakers or outliers that they still fit into the whole, but also enlarge the whole in some way. One of them is Roma Kid, which I thought of when you were talking about your experience as a reporter, for one thing. Also, it's also noteworthy in that in in a book, and in an oeuvre where characters talk so beautifully, so masterfully, and often so compulsively. It's a story without much talking in it.
Yeah.
Can you say where that came from?
It's very it's much quieter initially than a lot of my work. It's on an unusual gestation for me, really, because it began with a purely visual image, which isn't my usual method, and it was just this young Roma girl, maybe 10 years old, on the train from Sligo to Dublin, sitting in between two carriages, clearly alone, clearly looking a bit worried. And she just kind of, I might have seen her for like 10 seconds in passing, but she just kind of haunted me for a few weeks, and sat back there in the subconscious place where stories start sort of giving off their gases, and I kind of thought, can I be bold enough to try and get in just in behind her forehead and see what she's seeing. And it was because she was so different from my usual very verbal, very Irish characters. It was difficult, and I thought the only way I can write this story is sentence by sentence, is let one line give on to the next. I do think a good short story does have a kind of a tune. It does have a kind of a melody that you kind of uncover sentence by sentence as you go along, and you can almost let the sound of the sentences dictate the events and what happens. It becomes a kind of a fairy story. In the second half, essentially, she disappears into the woods. I'm kind of unashamed about going into this kind of genre territory, because of the difficulty in it, the like of getting away with that on the page, where you kind of tiptoe up to the cusp of believability, where you're dragging the reader to a place where he or she is going, oh, come on. It's a very dangerous place to operate as a writer, but if you get away with it, it can give you kind of rewards as well. And it's actually when she meets this old man in the woods who's almost an elfin kind of type, and when he started to speak in a kind of mode that was very familiar to me and very easy for me to do, I could kind of hear her in relief, even though she says almost nothing. I kind of got her in relief against this kind of character who was very familiar to me. What I liked especially about the story was that in the closing page, its time frame kind of accelerates. It's been going along kind of hour by hour and minute by minute, and at the end it just goes decades very quickly. And again, that was a surprise to me that it would do so. But yeah, it's kind of I most stories, once I write them, I kind of forget about them. Pretty much, and I don't read over them, but that one kind of stuck with me a bit. I like it, and it kind of haunts me a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. And the other story I was thinking of toward the end, actually at the end, which when you start, it comes as a kind of surprise, but an enlarging surprise, is Areki and the Bug House, which is there's a kind of biographical accident that ties the story of Theodore Retke and his madness to the west of Ireland. But I wonder if there's more of a connection than that for you with him.
Yeah, it was one of those kind of I had the glorious thing that happened far too rarely in a short story writer's career, which is a deadline. There's never a pressing urgency about short stories. So it's never like, get me that story by Friday. But I actually had that situation. It was the Irish Times was doing a summer series of stories, and I'd promised them one for the Tuesday, and it was Friday. And I was out on this little island off the west coast here in Ishboffin to give a reading. And I was in the bar, in the pub down on the harbour there. And there was a little plaque on the wall that Theodore Retke, the American poet, drank and essentially had a crack up here in 1960, And I'd heard the story before. There was a memoir by an Irish poet called Richard Murphy in which he told the story about he invited Retke and his young wife Beatrice out there in 1960, and Retke was apparently an absolute car crash as a person. He just caused havoc on the island. He drank and chased women and had serious episodes. And it got to the point where a couple of weeks in that the locals gathered in the community hall and said, "We've got to get this guy off the island." And he was committed to the psychiatric hospital back on the mainland. And knowing little beyond him, only that he was a car crash, but I'd always been moved by the poems when I'd come across them in anthologies and so forth. He had that kind of his poetic line has that lovely kind of mid-century glamour to it. The kind of neon kind of haze that you might even find in something like Bellow or something like Salter, even that kind of beautiful glamorous prose, just a really sinuous line. And I thought, okay, I'll try Retka, and it was a gift. About 3 days, hardly needed a second draft. I just got it as I was on the island. And yeah, it's, you always start a short story with a kind of a vaulting ambition for it. This is going to be the one, and it rarely works out. But I felt that I got a language that felt right for him, and just the place he was in then made it kind of, qualified it for the book in some way. It was more West of Ireland madness, which is a slightly different approach. But yeah, yeah, it's weird actually. I had just finished a novel about 3 days before that. The novel Beetlebone, which has John Lennon looking for his island in the west of Ireland, and I vowed on the Tuesday, never again am I putting a real character into a novel. It's too much responsibility, and I was at it by the Friday, But it's weird. I do think writing fiction is a little bit like physical fitness. When you're in those closing stages of a novel, all the systems are kind of firing, and you can sometimes get an extra bit of work out of it. And I got Retka after that. I wrote the first story to Coastal Leitrim just after finishing Tangier a few days later. So it's almost a tactic now when I finish a novel to try and get that extra little bit of juice out,
Yeah. Well, normally I might consider this an impolite question, but considering how productive you are, what are you working on now?
Well, there's always way too many pokers in the fire because I work in different forms. And there is a traditional mistrust of the all-rounder, and I think it's entirely deserved. These guys who are trying to succeed on all fronts at once, deserve to fail at all of them. But I drift around from things. I usually kind of go at something for 3 or 4 weeks and sort of tire of it and try some other project. So at the moment, it's the screen adaptation of Nightboat to Tangier and looking at a play that might happen next summer, depending on plague, sort of related reasons with whatever's going on with that.
Yeah. I think we're getting near the time when I should turn it over to our moderator for audience questions. But the last thing I'll ask you is just because this whole setup is so strange. I know that there are some writers who love to kind of get out on the road and see new places and meet their public, and there are some writers who really just prize their routine and resent having to go out and talk to strangers. So is this the best book tour ever or the worst?
It's kind of got elements of both. I was very excited about the fact that I didn't have to leave my house. I thought, yes, no trains, no planes, no kind of, not ending up in the hotel bar every night and stuff like that. It's going to be but it's weird. I really miss that now. I really miss kind of, it's a little corny and a little cheesy, but it's you miss kind of meeting readers on a kind of face-to-face basis. It means a great deal when somebody tells you they got something out of your book, So yeah, I mean, it's a wonderful add-on, isn't it, to be able to do this, and I hope it continues at some level. I'm sure a lot of the stores will continue to have sort of online series because it really opens it up. And I was really amazed actually to meet a lot of readers meet a lot of people through these who've said to me, we're kind of shy about going to literary events. Not sure what was expected of us, and it's kind of, and this is a kind of a gateway drug for them into showing up in real life if we ever get back there again.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you so much, John. I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, we don't have any questions so far. I would encourage our viewers who must be rapt by the conversation to not be shy and submit them. I'll just add that we certainly, as a bookstore in Little Ann Arbor, Michigan, appreciate the ability to fold the map. And while I don't like keeping our friends and authors in the UK up all night with these events, it's just a pleasure to be able to do this, and I think it will continue this way. It's a rare. I think as a analog technology service, we don't realize that we can make use of some of this digital technology in the service of the book as an object too, and it's been really wonderful. But Jonathan, if there's any other questions you wanted to ask Kevin, we didn't get to it, as I encourage our guests to submit any questions they have. Or Kevin, if you wanted to read maybe another passage.
Will I take us out with another little passage just to close? That sounds like that sounds like a good idea. I will read. We mentioned Retka in the Boghouse, so you guys already know the setup of the story. I'll just read a page or two of Retka to close off, and thanks again, guys, for having me and for hosting. So in 1960, the American poet Theodore Retka and his wife Beatrice spent time on the island of Inishbofin off the coast of Galway. While on the island, Retka had a breakdown and was committed to the psychiatric hospital at Ballinasloe on the mainland. The limbs of a dead whitethorn appear in the dark to say that the night dissolves. The large, dishevelled man fills the hospital window with a spidery grin as the last of the dark gives out to grey morning. The morning comes up after a night such as this, and you feel like you fought a fucking war. Now come the slate roofs and the chimney pots, and all the weary rest of it, Ballinasloe is greyly waking. He turns to the slight man, sat neatly in a bedside chair with palms rested on cheerful knees. What did you say your name was, doctor? I didn't. I'm O'Reilly. Oh, I believe it. The doctor has spatters of mud or cow shit on the hems of his trousers, equine snout, tiny head. He half rises from the chair and turns it to face the thin new light in the window and sits again. And how should I address you, Mr. It's Retka, but you can call me Ted. This all seems entirely reasonable. Yes, I am Ted, and I am made of flesh, bones, and gases, and this spidery grin. Anxiety falls away its arbitrary music. Unquestionably, I could use a drink also. Now the large man can feel the grin detach itself from the tight lines of his mouth. August here is dense as a jungle in the rain, and it plays sour notes in his glands and pulses. Are you experiencing agitation, Ted? Well, all this in heaven too. He arranges a sigh, and to emphasize it rests a buttock on the edge of the mattress. Bony as an army bed. The doctor crosses his leg now. The doctor sits a kind, interested chin on his knitted fingers. In truth, Dr. O'Reilly, I'd say there's been nothing that's absolutely a surprise to me. All this coming and going from himself. He would like very much now to spread his fat limbs in the water because I could float like a lily pad, and I am beautiful in the water. I have such grace when I am floating there. There is a burning sensation in his chest. He would like a tall, stiff drink, and he would like to fumble with some skirt in a taxi. I think I could make you shriek, actually. What it is, it's a fucking joke. You take absolutely and positively and stick them together. I am aware of my fucking words, O'Reilly. What is it? The line from Hopkins. I am gall. I am heartburn. You need to try some Pepto-Bismol, friend, and you need to try it today. This doctor's head is quite simply too small for a grown man's. Gives him a beanie look, very punchable. I understand that you write, Ted. Oh, angelically. On Inishbofin, he looked to the sky and saw fires on the moon. He lay wrapped in his overcoat on the pier all night long, and for a while a safe harbour it seemed. Yes, there was a bottle, and Mars also was visible. About this recent unpleasantness, doctor, it's nothing I can't handle. Cold white wine, a belly full of shellfish, a hotsy-totsy in a yellow cab. The city's rank night odours, her pearl buttons straining, and seen as you ask, girl, well, yes, the thought is always crossing my mind. I do mean always. I think we could do filthy things together, just you and me. I believe that it's poetry, Ted. Fuck off. Ah, no, Ted, I'm sorry. That's all right. I believe it's poetry that you write. So do I. No, that would be pat. The line swings out too easily. It intends to be. Oh, you pompous ass with your handsome jowls, your lurching heart. This doctor is a religious, I can tell. The placid god haunts of his pale green eyes. Did you come loose of yourself in Nishboffin, Ted? That's a very attractive way of putting it, Doctor. And I'll leave it there. Thanks so much. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It's just such a pleasure to hear you read, Kevin, and thank you for humoring us with one more passage. Beautiful. We did have one question come in for both of you, actually,
Sure.
if you'll
Cool.
humor it. And I think it's a fitting question to end the evening on. We were talking before we went live about coming back after this plague and what it would be like. And I think trying to be optimistic about that and sunny side of here's a question that speaks to things we can do on the other side of all this. Greetings from DC. Our viewer writes, Kevin and Jonathan, do you have any literary pilgrimages that stand out to you from your travels?
Wow. Jonathan?
I'm drawing a blank right now. Do you have one?
I do. We mentioned earlier that research, you don't realize you're doing at the time that gives you fiction. I think I got the recent novel, Night Boat to Tangier, from a trip that I took in 1991 as a 21-year-old when I went to Tangier for reasons that were entirely William Burroughs related. I was at that tender time in my life a huge Burroughs boy fan, and with some friends we went to Tangier and stayed in the hotel where he wrote The Naked Lunch and all that kind of stuff. I remembered nothing about Tangier afterwards for various reasons, but I remembered a lot about the ferry port in Spain, Algeciras, from where you take the boat to Tangier. It's one of the two seediest places I've ever been in my life. The other being the Greyhound station in Los Angeles in the late 1990s. You'd want the eyes sideways in your head, to use an Irish expression. But yeah, that early 90s trip to Tangier, which wasn't today nor yesterday, that stands out for me.
Well, thank you, and hopefully we can all take our own literary pilgrimages sometime soon. But until then, it's just such a pleasure to be able to, like I said, fold the map and have you both in our virtual bookstore this evening, which is just my room in Ann Arbor. But Jonathan Dee, Kevin Barry, thank you so much for joining us at Home with Literati. We can't wait to have you actually in the store for your next books. So please come join us then. And until then, please continue to stay safe and be well. And to all of our attendees, thank you for joining us. We also hope you stay safe and be well, and we'll see you at the next event. This is our last event of the week as America does a little minor history tomorrow, and we'll be back next week with more events. And until then, good evening and have a great night, everybody.
Thanks so much, guys. Take care. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Bye now.